Welcome to Illinois in Focus. I'm Greg Bishop. Coming up, we'll review the week's top stories about the corruption trial of former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan and co-defendant Michael McClain, and the state in Chicago doubling down on migrant sanctuary policies ahead of President-elect Donald Trump's inauguration on Monday. I'll then join the Center Square's Dan McCaleb to further discuss those stories and more. That's ahead with Illinois in Focus. I'm Greg Bishop.
Do you know what elected officials in Illinois are doing with your tax dollars? Do you want to make sure that your voice is heard? If so, then you need Blue Room Stream, a live and archived video streaming service that provides access to government meetings and events. With Blue Room Stream, you can watch how your elected officials make decisions, hold them accountable for their actions, and be a more informed citizen. Blue Room Stream is the perfect way to get involved in the democratic process and to make a difference in your community. Subscribe today at blueroomstream.com.
Welcome back to Illinois in Focus. I'm Greg Bishop. The defense has rested its case, and prosecutors' rebuttal is done at the corruption trial of former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan. Jim Talamonte reports.
Judge John Robert Blakey told jurors to return next Wednesday for closing arguments after he holds an instruction conference with attorneys on Tuesday. Former State Rep Jeannie Ives said the judicial process for Madigan has taken a long time.
Well, certainly, for him to take 4 years to come to trial, that is maddening.
On Thursday, Judge Blakey denied motions for acquittal on several counts by both defendants. FBI Special Agent Ryan McDonald reported to the witness stand for the fourth time in the trial. McDonald answered questions about a video conference investigators had with Madigan's former law partner, Bud Gatzendanner. Closing arguments are expected to begin next Wednesday. In Chicago, I'm Jim Talamonte.
President-elect Donald Trump's plans to deport criminal non-citizen migrants from Chicago continues to be opposed by city officials. Wednesday, city aldermen voted to block an effort to relax the city's migrant sanctuary status. Mayor Brandon Johnson's deputy mayor, Beatrice Ponce de Leon, said the city is focusing on policies to stifle deportation efforts at various city shelters.
There are certain things that you want to ensure that it is, in fact, an ICE agent that is approaching you. There are ways to verify that. We ask for a federal judicial warrant. This is all information that is really public knowledge.
At an unrelated event Wednesday, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker said his administration is talking to clergy members and hospitals, but doesn't want to reveal anything in particular.
I wouldn't want to, tell the folks who are executing on policies that don't make any sense for the state of Illinois how they can be more effective at effectuating them.
Trump has promised to deport criminal non-citizen migrants in the country. His border czar, Tom Homan, has said Chicago will be ground zero for those efforts. Those are the top stories from the past week from Illinois. Find more online at thecentersquare.com. Coming up for Illinois in Focus, I'll join the Center Square's Dan McCaleb to further discuss the news. This is Illinois in Focus, a production of America's Talking Network. I'm Greg Bishop.
Tired of being in the dark about what happens day to day under the dome in Springfield? Do you want to be more informed in the decision-making process? If so, you need Blue Room Stream, a live and archived video streaming service that provides access to government meetings and events. With Blue Room Stream, you can watch elected officials in action, holding them accountable, and having your say on issues that matter most to you. Blue Room Stream is the perfect way to stay informed about Illinois state government and to be a more engaged citizen. Become a subscriber today at blueroomstream.com.
Welcome back to Illinois in Focus, powered by the Center Square. I'm Dan McCaleb, Chief Content Officer at Franklin News Foundation, publisher of the Center Square Newswire service. Michael Madigan's time on the witness stand is over, and his corruption trial could be wrapping up soon as well. The longtime former Illinois House Speaker shocked many when he agreed to testify in his own defense last week. After spending several days on the witness stand into this week, Madigan is done, and closing arguments in the trial could begin as early as next week. Joining me to discuss this is Greg Bishop, Illinois Associate Editor for the Center Square. Greg, the Center Square has been in the courtroom every trial day since early October when jury selection began. Is there really an end in sight?
I think we're getting close to it, Dan. Obviously, as you said, in early October, this all started, and while they took several days off for the Christmas and New Year's holiday, they came back with that big surprise that Mike Madigan was indeed going to take the witness stand in his own defense in his corruption trial. So I do think, indeed, with the defense resting today on Thursday when we're recording this, we're going to get close to closing arguments before too long, and then the jury is going to get this very large and convoluted case alleging corruption of the former longtime Illinois House Speaker, who is arguably the most powerful man in Illinois for decades.
The big unknown here is, the judge has given some timelines. The big unknown here is how long it's going to take for this jury to deliberate the case. You've got 12 jurors who have been listening to testimony for weeks on end, hearing secretly recorded phone calls, more than 200 of those, witness after witness after witness. 12 jurors have to come to a unanimous verdict on every single count. Madigan and co-defendant Michael McClain each charged with 23 counts of corruption-related charges. It could take jurors days, more than days, weeks possibly, to deliberate this case.
Yeah, I can't fathom the order of magnitude they have in front of them. And of course, the judge is going to be putting together instructions this weekend and likely will be conveying those instructions to the jury. But as you said, I mean, hours of tape and video, scores of emails and receipts and documents, and let alone the transcript from testimony, including Michael Madigan's testimony in this case. They're going to have to pour through all of that, right? So you got 12 jurors deciding the fate of two individuals based off of all of that evidence that prosecutors presented in this case. They have a tall order in front of them, especially with the specter of that recent U.S. Supreme Court ruling concerning bribery and whether bribery is a favor done by somebody before an official action or gratitude after an official action. Obviously, that's going to play into some of the thinking of the jury, but really, I think the whatever verdict arises out of this, and keep in mind, it could be a mix of 10 guilty verdict or 10 charges he's found guilty of and the other 11 not. But obviously, we're all going to have to wait and see what the jury says in all of this. And it could take just one juror to essentially bring about a hung jury. And what happens after that? But clearly, the judge in this case is doing all he can to prepare for whatever outcome there may be. There's been talk in the court. Our reporter Jim Talamonte has been in there throughout the duration of it. But there's been talk in court about a forfeiture hearing if indeed Madigan and McClain are found guilty, and how that could start possibly immediately after a guilty verdict is rendered. So the jury, I don't envy what they have in front of them. It's been a long, arduous process, a lot of names, a lot of history, a lot of documents and tapes. And their interpretation of those things and bringing in the instructions by the judge to look at the law and what the law says and whether the law was violated, they've got a tall order. And I think that once this is all done, they're going to have a lot to talk about. There's no question. If you recall, the ComEd 4 trial, one of the jurors came out, and that was a case that was related to this. What federal prosecutors called the Madigan Enterprise, where they convicted 4 individuals, including co-defendant Michael McClain in this case. One of the jurors came out and said that they were just sick and tired of corruption in Illinois. Will those same sentiments be felt by other jurors in this case? We'll see, but clearly we'll be in the courtroom to get out that verdict as soon as it happens, and we'll be there to also capture any statements and sentiments that any of the jurors have whenever they come to a verdict.
Yeah, among the charges against Madigan and McClain are the accusations that ComEd, the state's largest utility, as well as AT&T Illinois, gave no work or little work jobs to Madigan associates to curry favor with him, so that the Illinois legislature would pass legislation favorable to the utility's bottom line. In addition to the ComEd 4 trial last year, where 4 executives and lobbyists associated with ComEd, they were found guilty. ComEd itself, as a company, agreed in a deferred prosecution agreement to pay $200 million for its role in the scheme. It's going to be in jurors' hands soon enough. I know you, me, our listeners, Jim Talamani, the reporter who's been covering the case, Brett Rowland, who's also pitched in on it. We're all anxious to see this come to a close. We'll see what happens.
We'll also have to see, Dan, if indeed the outcome of this case brings about any substantive reforms in Illinois state law to clean up government and trying to find a way to keep these alleged acts from happening again in the future. Because you got to keep in mind the ComEd saga. Ultimately, legislation was passed that benefited ComEd at the expense of ratepayers across the state of Illinois, increasing their utilities substantially. So clearly there are unsavory outcomes whenever corruption takes over. And with these allegations, if indeed they're guilty, we got to see what happens at the State House of the Democrats in control of the State House. What are they willing to do? What are they planning to do to clean up government?
I know what I think is going to happen there, Greg, and it's pretty much what's happened there for the last 10, 12, 15 years. Nothing when it comes, very little, I should say, when it comes to ethics reform. Maybe if there is a conviction in this case, that'll swing some minds. Greg, we've been talking about the Chicago Bears wanting a new stadium for quite a while now. It seems like for the first time, a top elected official in Illinois is saying maybe taxpayers could help build that stadium. House Speaker Emanuel Chris Welsh indicated that he might be willing to use state money to help the Bears build the stadium. What's going on here?
And rewind all the way back to last spring when the Bears were floating the idea of a new stadium in Chicago, and this came after they purchased property in Arlington Heights, the old Arlington Raceway. And there was a scuttle that they would build a very large entertainment venue that would include a new Bears stadium. Well, last spring, everybody from the governor to the Illinois House Speaker said there's no appetite for taxpayers to support any of this. But recently, Speaker Welch told Fox 32 out of Chicago it seems to now depend on where this new planned facility would be if it goes in Chicago. He said in particular, if it goes in the area of the former Michael Reese Hospital, just south of McCormick Place in Chicago, well, that could change things. The speaker said that, that neighborhood really needs some economic development, and it changes the conversation moving forward. But when you talk about state tax dollars subsidizing private groups like a National Football League, you get into some questions of, is there really a benefit? While those supporting such an idea, including the Bears, would say they bring a huge economic boon to Chicago, does it really pan out that way? Dan, you and I are always seeing these estimates that come out from proposed projects that it's going to have X millions of dollars of economic benefit. And those are just projections, and they're put into news releases and flashy headlines. But, does it really produce that kind of benefits, especially considering the taxpayer cost here? Keep in mind, the Bears planned stadium, they're looking at a $4.7 billion with a B cost. And taxpayers could be on the hook for $2 billion of that. Will there be $2 billion of economic benefits to pay that off? The Tax Foundation's Adam Hoffer says whenever tax dollars get involved in these types of things, they typically get a sports team, but not much else. So clearly there's going to be a lot of criticism and speculation as to how this proceeds. We're in a new General Assembly. We've got until May 31st for substantive legislation to pass. So this is yet another thing on our docket to keep a close eye on.
Yeah, Greg, the Center Square has done extensive reporting on the whole stadium funding thing across the country. The Bears, of course, are not the only NFL team or Major League Baseball team or NBA team, for that matter, to put their hands out to governments, local and state governments, asking for them, taxpayers, to support funding the stadium. And those economic benefit studies that you've referenced, they've been largely debunked. The truth is, the Bears are already here in Chicago, right? Any new stadium is not going to generate new revenue. It'll replace existing revenue. We also have to remember, if the General Assembly and Governor Pritzker decide to give taxpayer dollars to the Bears, The White Sox owner is also out there with his hand out. The Chicago women's soccer team has asked for help. If the legislature does decide to do this, there's going to be plenty of other teams coming back for more as well.
Yeah, the precedent it would set would definitely open up the floodgates of the lobbying efforts by these other professional sports teams to get their piece of the pie. But, Dan, the state of Illinois looking at a $3 billion budget deficit in the coming fiscal year. I don't know how much more you can squeeze out of that turnip to try to pad the pockets of these private professional sports teams.
Moving on, Greg, I was a little surprised by this story, but some Democratic lawmakers and other advocates held a news conference this week saying they are going to push legislation to decriminalize sex work, such as prostitution. You think that's going to go anywhere?
Dan, I'm surprised that you're surprised that the state of Illinois is possibly going to consider this, especially considering that we've legalized medical cannabis and adult use cannabis and sports betting and other similar vices. But yes, this is now an idea officially filed at the State House, and we're going to see this debated at some point. But Dan, I don't think we can call it prostitution anymore. During lame duck session, legislators passed a bill that changes the word prostitute in state law with the term persons engaged in the sex trade. So that seems to be a precursor for them preparing to approve a bill that would decriminalize sex work. Now, here's an interesting group's name. They're called SWAG, Sex Worker Advocacy Group, and they say that a bill that's going to be filed in the 104th General Assembly would modernize existing laws pertaining to sex work, and it would also, the advocates say, would provide safety, privacy, and, quote, dignity of adults engaged in consensual sex work. Would also bring about a sex workers' bill of rights. How far this particular piece of legislation gets, I guess it's worth watching closely, as the state of Illinois already has a reputation for being very, very liberal. This could just add to that, and it could make the state the first state to decriminalize sex work in this fashion. As all states, except for areas of Nevada, it's illegal, prostitution is. So yes, this is just one of the thousands of bills that are going to be filed over the next few weeks. And clearly, with all of the other priorities there are in the state of Illinois, from the budget deficit to, as we talked about earlier, ethics reforms to the state's high taxes. We have the second or highest property taxes in the nation. You look at the overall tax rate on sales taxes and income taxes and everything else stacked on top of each other. Interesting that the economic activity they're focused on isn't looking to relax regulations on small businesses, but rather they're going to be looking at possibly relaxing the law when it comes to sex work.
Greg, as far as I'm aware, Governor Pritzker has not spoken publicly about this effort. Do you have any idea if he supports it, does not support it, has taken a stance at all?
You know, the group that was part of a news conference earlier this week pushing for this idea, Equality Illinois, they are big allies of the governor. The governor has, I believe, received awards from the group Equality Illinois. And they're a very prominent voice for the LGBTQ community. And that's another area that the governor prides himself on being an ally. So just the mere fact that Equality Illinois is really behind this and pushing this, I would imagine that they've got the governor's ear on this. So we'll be seeing what he has to say about the idea of legalizing prostitution.
Sticking with Governor Pritzker, he has indicated that he will sign a measure approved by the previous General Assembly that would require police officers to confiscate firearms from subjects of domestic violence orders of protection. Domestic violence is absolutely wrong. People should be held accountable for that, punished for that. But you're going to now ask police officers, local police officers, to go to their homes and confiscate their weapons?
Yeah, this is a law that's called Karina's Law. They've talked about this for several years at the State House to modify the state's laws concerning orders of protection in domestic violence cases where there's a firearms order issued. Now, the current law, it's already in place. Somebody can go and get an order of protection against a domestic partner or a spouse. And the court then grants the order of protection, and if that individual has firearms, their FOID card is suspended, and they're supposed to relinquish those firearms to a third party that's qualified to take those firearms. That could be an uncle across town, or it could be going to the police station and relinquishing those firearms voluntarily. Now, advocates for gun control say that's not enough. They say that too often we've seen stories of somebody who has an order of protection against them going and using a firearm to murder or harm the person that issued the order of protection against them or the person that requested the order of protection against them. So their thinking was that instead of waiting for the subject of the order of protection to relinquish their firearms, they're now going to have police confiscate those firearms. This raises all kinds of issues. Top of mind is the due process issues. Dan, I think everybody can agree. Somebody who's convicted of domestic battery must be held accountable and have rights restricted. No question about that. But the key word there is conviction, and that is having due process, facing your accuser, going through the evidence, and having a jury or a judge determine your fate. That's not part of this equation, and that's the big holdup for a lot of gun rights advocates who say we need that due process, because while everybody agrees domestic abusers should be held to account, that's only if they are given that due process right and convicted of such activities. So this is likely going to end up in court. The governor has said that he thinks it's a good bill. He's going to sign it when it gets to his desk. But clearly, this is another gun control measure in the state of Illinois that is likely going to be tied up in courts. The real question is how many people are going to be impacted by this law after the governor signs it before the courts, which take a long time to deal with these types of questions, as we've seen. How long is it going to take for people to be impacted by this before it actually gets dealt with by the courts?
Greg, in the final minute that we have left, I want to touch on one more story with President-elect Donald Trump being inaugurated, officially taking office on Monday. One of the first actions the former president and soon-to-be president said he's going to do is he's going to deport violent foreign nationals who are in the country illegally. Chicago is and has been a sanctuary city for a long time. And this week at the Chicago City Council meeting, council members doubled down on that.
Yeah, so there were several Chicago aldermen that wanted to relax the sanctuary policies to allow for local law enforcement to work with ICE officials to go after criminal non-citizen migrants in the state. Well, Chicago aldermen decided, the majority of them, not to go forward with that, so they kept their sanctuary policies in place. Listen, Tom Homan, the incoming Trump administration border czar, he has said that Chicago is going to be ground zero for their efforts to go after criminal non-citizen migrants. So what the city's already done is they put a word out to shelters throughout the city that house migrants, saying that they need to be aware of who is actually an ICE agent. They need to demand any kind of federal warrant that might have been issued. But clearly, the city of Chicago is doubling down on this, despite a growing contingent of Chicagoans wanting to get rid of the sanctuary policies because they feel that they're being left and pushed to the side as tax dollars. More than $1 billion have gone to help non-citizen migrants with everything from housing to healthcare to education and beyond. So we're going to be watching this closely. Trump takes office Monday. You could start seeing some executive orders issued concerning migration, and then you could possibly see some efforts in Chicago proper of ICE officials going to detain individuals and work to deport them.
Greg, thank you for joining us today. Listeners can keep up with all of the stories we talked about and more at thecentersquare.com.